Right, this clip is based around Unit 2 of Open University course M150, which is all about representation. So, the type of representation is important to consider first of all. The course materials say that representations must be perceivable. So they're either visual, so we can see them, auditory, we can hear them, or tactile, that we can feel them. And it's basically as simple as that. So as long as we can perceive the representation, then that's good. You have in your representation a link between form and content. So what you're trying to get across and how you present it, quite loosely. When you're considering representation, especially if in a TMA question, for example, you're asked to come up with your own, it's important to consider conventions. So you're going to consider who's going to be using or accessing your representation and what their sort of familiarities and experiences are. If you are only coming up with a representation for example, people from the UK, you can assume that to a certain extent we have a shared culture and a shared understanding of common symbols and meanings and things like that. If you're designing something a bit more generic, then you might need to alter how you're going to represent it so that everybody understands the common meaning behind it. Sort of related to this is that your representation must be fit for purpose. So it needs to include all of the details that you need to get your meaning across, but not too much information, as otherwise you're going to distract from the meaning that you're trying to get across to the person looking at it. Relating to this is sort of redundancy and ambiguity as well. If you have a lot of redundant data, so a lot of extra stuff in your representation, it's going to distract from what you're trying to get across. A really good example of this is in the units. There's an ordnance survey map and a hand-drawn map trying to get to the dinner party. If you're trying to get to somebody's house, all you need to know is that it's the third turning on the left. You don't actually need to know where the first and the second turning go to. So that would be an example of sort of redundant data. It's also an example of abstraction, which is covered later on in the course, sort of. Ambiguity. You want to make sure that your representation is as unambiguous as possible. This may not always be possible, because relating to the convention, different things mean different, for different user groups. The key subject that's discussed in Unit 2 is the difference between simple and complex representation. So complex representation in a nutshell is a combination of basic parts, each of which contributes meaning to the overall representation. If you're adding a part in and it doesn't add to the meaning, that isn't making it more complex. So the basic parts are normally symbols, colours, shapes, sounds, and combinations of those. So for example, if you have a symbol and you put a cross through it, then that's combining two different sets of symbols to create additional meaning. So normally that would mean either no or similar to that, so it's negating what's behind it. Do be really careful that you understand the difference between simple and complex representation. Just by adding colour to a simple representation won't make it complex, as hopefully we can see by this. In the UK, our road signs, which are dealt with in Unit 2, you've got the red warning triangle, which is the same in both. In the UK, we'd have a white background to our triangle, but obviously polar bears don't show up all that well on white backgrounds. What I'm basically trying to get across here is that standard colours and standard way of representing things are only sort of meaningful when you have that convention. If you consider the road signs in Ireland, for example, they're mostly yellow, sort of diamond shaped, and they're all the same. They're all yellow diamonds. So the fact that there's a shape there and a colour there is meaningless to the overall representation. It doesn't add any additional meaning. Unlike in the UK, we've got our triangles or circles, which mean different things, and red and blue mean different things. The fact you've got a load of yellow diamonds doesn't make it a complex representation. So do be really careful not to fall into the trap. The other trap not to fall into, which a lot of students do every year, is the difference between a complex representation and what I'd call a complicated representation. Just because there's a lot of stuff in there or a lot of symbols doesn't mean it's a complex representation. I'm sorry these are a little bit blurry, but these come from Word. So the top icon is an illustration of this. So this is the track changes symbol in Word. So you've got like a little document, you've got a pencil writing a little line, and you've got a little flash at the top. So you've got three symbols that you're combining, but because none of them have any particular convention within the rest of the document, then I'd argue that this isn't a complex representation. It's a complicated symbol that is a simple representation. Conversely, at the bottom, and this is the highlight icon in Word, I'd say this probably is a complex representation, because in the first picture on the left hand side I've decided to highlight in blue, on the right hand side it's going to highlight in red. So adding the colour does add a certain something to it, so it's saying I'm going to highlight and this is the colour I'm going to highlight it in. So you could argue that the second one is a complex representation. So do be very careful not to fall into the trap of thinking just because something looks complicated that it's complex. So I hope that's useful, and thank you very much.